This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Hello and welcome to Talking Turkey. I'm your host, Ahval editor David Lepeska, and with me today is Yaman Akdeniz, Faculty of Law at Istanbul Bilgi University. Hello, Yaman, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, David. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. We are speaking on Wednesday, April 15th, nearly 5 weeks after Turkey reported its first coronavirus case. Today, the world passed 2 million total cases of COVID-19. At latest count, Turkey had about 65,000 cases, ninth most in the world, and just over 1,400 deaths. Some in Turkey are accusing President Erdogan of using the coronavirus crisis as a pretext to take greater control of social media. A draft of Turkey's economic aid package in response to the pandemic was made public last week, and one article stipulates that all platforms with more than 1 million daily users, which would include Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, must appoint a legal representative within Turkey to whom courts can turn to remove content or block certain accounts. Any platform that fails to comply would have its bandwidth reduced to the point basically of unusability. I believe this article was removed from the aid bill this week, actually, but most observers believe the AKP government will continue its efforts to get it passed or to pass something similar. Yaman, what would this new regulation mean for social media in Turkey?
Well, first of all, it's worth putting this in context because internet is quite restrictive in Turkey, as you are aware. But to clarify this for the listeners,
sure, please.
Turkey has restrictive provisions to block access to web content from Turkey. In fact, just over 300,000 websites are currently blocked, in addition to approximately 150,000 URLs.
These including, I should say, the website of this news outlet, Ava.
Yes, and in fact, Turkey constantly blocks access to news websites such as Ahval and recently Oda TV. In the past, in fact, 63 different times, Sendika.org, and several others, including the Wikipedia platform until January 2020. For almost 2.5 years, Turkish users did not have access to the Wikipedia platform. And between 2008 and 2010, access to the YouTube platform was constantly blocked. In 2014, just before an important election, local election, access to both Twitter and YouTube platforms were completely blocked. And me and my colleague Kerem Altıparmak, we applied successfully to the Constitutional Court to overturn the ban. This is the background. More recently, with regards to COVID-19 pandemic in Turkey, and since this started in Turkey, the authorities started to investigate social media accounts which they claim to publish provocative sharings and content related to government's coronavirus strategy.
Right. Several. Just want to say several hundred people have been investigated and many detained for posts seen as critical of the government, which the government officially says are a threat to incite fear and panic.
Yes, and they have given us some statistics, and between 15th March and 5th of April, 3,576 social media accounts have been subject to an investigation. Wow. And then 616 criminal investigations have been initiated so far, and 229 people have been detained as well. And among the people that they detained and investigated, over 10 journalists, mainly local journalists, and 2 members of the parliament, both from HDP. One of them is Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu from Kocaeli, and the other one is Remziye Tosun from Diyarbakır. Both of them for COVID-19 related speeches and social media comments that they shared. have been subject to criminal investigation. So with this background, David, they introduced an unexpected bill or draft bill, let's say, which obviously raised concerns. That's why we're talking about it today.
Right. So again, right. The new regulation stipulates that all platforms with more than 1 million users would appoint a legal representative in Turkey to whom courts in Turkey could turn, and any platform that fails to comply would have its bandwidth reduced to the point of unusability. What would this regulation mean for social media in Turkey? How would it alter things from what we have today when people are already facing investigations and detention?
Yeah. And first of all, at the moment, the targeted social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram, even TikTok would come under these proposed draft provisions, I would say. And at the moment, they have some of these social media platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter have legal representatives in Turkey, but they do not have any official presence in Turkey. So they have not established an office or they do not have any legal representation, let's say. So this draft tries to compel social media platforms to have a legal representative and an office in Turkey. That's the first thing it tries to do. It says you have to come to Turkey legally, and we need to know who your legal representative in Turkey is. So this is the first stage, but this is not necessarily a welcome to Turkey, let's say Turkish coffee kind of invitation. It states that if you do not come to Turkey, we are going to restrict your internet bandwidth up to 50% in the first place. And if you do not comply with our second request within 30 days, we are going to restrict your bandwidth, internet bandwidth, up to 95%. This basically means, to clarify for the listeners, that these social media platforms will be almost unusable and inaccessible from Turkey. They're almost like they have been completely banned from Turkey. So this is one outcome because...
So basically you comply with this regulation or you leave the Turkish market.
Yes, you leave completely the Turkish market, and it's your fault that you left the Turkish market, because we only ask you to come and obey or respect our democratic laws and institutions. This is one outcome, of course, but it is also a catch-22 position. So on the one hand, you have to come to Turkey and comply with these requirements which we will talk about in a minute. And if you do not, your bandwidth will be restricted. But if you do come to Turkey and establish yourself an office and legal representation, then there are several things that they're supposed to be doing. That's why I'm saying it's a catch-22 situation. Because first of all, they are compelled to respond to all users' requests coming from users to remove content or block access to content within 72 hours. I mean, this does not necessarily mean that they need to do everything the users ask them to do, but there's a response mechanism, and within 72 hours, they need to comply with that. Otherwise, they will face heavy administrative financial sanctions. Minimum is 100,000 Turkish lira, and it goes up to 1 million Turkish lira if they do not respond to the user's request. And they are compelled also to provide reports, transparency reports to the Turkish Telecommunications Authority every 3 months. I mean, obviously, I'm not completely against the idea that these companies need to be transparent, and they do globally publish transparency reports, and in 2017 German law also compelled them to publish not every 3 months, but every 6 months detailed transparency reports. So they need to do that as well. And in addition to that, they are compelled to also remove content or block access to content if they receive blocking decisions from criminal judgeship of peace subject to law 5651, Article 9 and Article 9A. Both of them have been mentioned. These are to do with infringement of personal rights, such as defamation claims, in addition to privacy violations. So hundreds of these blocking decisions are issued. In fact, over 12,000 on average each year, judges in Turkey issue blocking decisions subject to law 5651. So,
yeah, also as part of the proposed regulation, social media platforms would need to store the data of Turkey-based users in Turkey, right? Could you tell me, why would Turkish authorities want this? What's the advantage?
Well, the advantage would be, there are two advantages of bringing them, three advantages of bringing the social media platforms to Turkey. First, we told they have to respond to requests from the users. Second, they would be compelled to do what the blocking decisions say. Because, David, at the moment, they do receive these blocking decisions, but they make an assessment with regards to their own community guidelines or internal policies. And some accounts they suspend, some accounts they make them unvisible from Turkey with the country withheld content policies. So they don't close down the account, but the account can be seen outside Turkey, but not from within Turkey. And the majority of the requests, they do not comply. There are several news sources and journalists, for example, Bir Gün or Sözcü Twitter accounts or the HDP Twitter accounts. There are blocking decisions with regards to these Twitter accounts. Journalist Can Dündar's account has been subject to a blocking decision. Activist Barbaros Şansal's account has been subjected to a blocking decision, but Twitter did not comply with these blocking decisions. So if they have legal presence in Turkey, then they will be compelled to block or even shut down those accounts. That's what the second tier of this coming to Turkey will achieve. And finally, going back to your question, of course, there are advantages of having the user data in Turkey because there are no democratic institutions or protection provided by law. Again, who is going to issue these decisions? The same judges that issue blocking decisions on a daily basis will be issuing the data request decisions, or even worse, the Telecommunication Authority, BTK, they will be asking these social media platforms to provide all the data for all the users at one go. So there will be easier ways to access user data. I mean, you can say, what happens if they access the user data? For example, speculating, I could say that will be the end of anonymous accounts in Turkey, or the parody accounts that Turkish Twitter, for example, is vibrant with anonymous political commentators. I see strong value for such speech in the Turkish context because people are obviously scared to put their political thoughts online because they fear persecution. And yes, there will be more people persecuted if the social media platforms are in Turkey. Or on the other hand, perhaps people will be scared and this will have a serious chilling effect on speech and will push people to auto-censor themselves. And there will be more self-censorship and people will not be willing to raise their concerns on the social media platforms.
You mentioned something that about contributor John Lubbock wrote for Aval last week that Turkey is the country that issued the most Twitter removal requests in 2019 with more than 6,000, but just 5% of them were granted. He said that the new law is in part a response to the Turkish government's inability to censor content on these websites that are not headquartered in Turkey. Like Aval, for instance, is blocked in Turkey, the website, but our Twitter accounts are not blocked because the Turkish government cannot prove to Twitter that they are breaking any laws. So you're saying, just to be clear, you're saying that if these companies, these social media platforms have offices in Turkey, they would then need to comply with Turkish government decisions?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, because otherwise the draft says that they will be subject to financial fines. Minimum is 1 million Turkish lira, going up to 5 million Turkish lira if they do not comply with the judge-issued blocking decision. So yes, Bir Gün, Sözcü, Ahval, Can Dündar, Barbaros Şansal, and others, their Twitter accounts will be, the likes of these people will be in danger because they will be compelled to, of course, they can challenge them and they can appeal against those decisions, but rarely, very rarely, Turkish judges accept these appeals. I mean, I have been in the business of appealing against several decisions or providing legal assistance to certain news providers in Turkey. Almost all of the appeals that we lodge are rejected by the same judges. And then the only thing you can do is take your case to the Constitutional Court, which we did, for example, in relation to Wikipedia. I was one of the applicants in the Wikipedia decision that took the Constitutional Court to decide in 2.5 years. We made a similar appeal for the Oda TV website, for example, and that may take many months, if not years, for the Constitutional Court to decide. So while there's a very swift and fast-track mechanism to block access to content and to remove content, there is no such mechanism, a swift mechanism for appealing against these decisions, which is unacceptable because obviously when you block access to a website, a news website like Ahval or Oda TV or Sendika.org, you're not only punishing these websites for whatever content which triggered the blocking decision, but it becomes a form of prior restraint so that, for example, when you publish this podcast, that will also be subject to the blocking decision, which was issued over, as far as I recall, almost 2 years ago. So this results into censorship.
Put this all together, and as you put it on Twitter, this regulation, if it were to pass, would represent the government's most powerful weapon against dissidents at home and abroad once the corona crisis has passed. Tell me, why do you say that? What would it look like in practice once it was enacted and was active?
I mean, I am expecting a more authoritarian regime in Turkey in the post-COVID-19 pandemic, even worse, and freedom of expression, freedom of the media, and of course, freedom of the internet. These are always in danger in Turkey. So this will, if this comes back, which it will come back, like a zombie spawning back to life, we will see another incarnation of this draft, which has been buried for the moment. And yes, this is well thought from the government's point of view. This looks like this has been prepared not in just one day. It doesn't look like it has been rushed, and cleverly structured piece of draft law from the government's point of view. And I'm sure it will come back, and it will, as you stated rightly so, become an important tool against dissidents and dissent on the Turkish social media platforms.
What about the platforms themselves? Do you see them complying within 60 days? Do they have any option? Is there any way for them to fight it?
Well, I mean, so far the social media platforms have been silent, and I would have expected an immediate response from at least Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, for that matter. And it remains complete to be seen whether they would comply and come and invest in Turkey. I mean, I believe they will have difficulty to find persons to appoint as their legal representation in Turkey, because that will become David, a very dangerous job, regardless of how much they pay to that person, because that person will be compelled to respond to Turkish authorities. And if the social media platforms resist, for example, complying with the decisions when they are in Turkey, or they resist providing the requested user data, then that person in Turkey will be subject to criminal investigation or prosecution himself or herself. So that's not an easy thing to establish, to come to Turkey or not to come to Turkey. It's a win-win for Turkey, but catch-22 situation for the social media platforms.
Many people say that the solution is VPNs, virtual private networks that allow users to mask their real location and appear to be accessing platforms from outside Turkey, for instance. But you said on Twitter recently that Turkey has begun blocking VPNs. Please, if you could tell us about that. Will VPNs soon not be a good workaround?
Well, Turkey first started to interfere with the VPN services back in 2014, when Twitter and YouTube were blocked just before the end of March 2014 local elections. And because obviously it was easy to bypass censorship with VPN tools, everyone started using free VPN services. Since then, it has been
back at that time in Gezi. I remember they were like written on walls, like graffiti.
Yeah. It has been now 6 years. I mean, and during that time, Turkey started to block access to well-known VPN providers, commercial VPN providers, such as, I'll give you some examples, ExpressVPN, for example, a US-based company, and private internet access known as PIA, a very well-known company in the United States again, CyberGhost, based in Romania, and NordVPN as well. And there are several others. I think there's a long list or growing list of more than 25 VPN services currently blocked from Turkey, and that will grow. And you cannot even access their websites, and they're blocking the VPN servers' IP addresses from Turkey, so they become unusable. Of course, there are several others that can be used, but the list is growing. And this is something I also said in the Twitter platform, that people used to tell me, you put the number 0 in front of Wikipedia to bypass the censorship. Yes, that worked for a while, and there are always ways to bypass censorship mechanisms, but that doesn't turn Turkey into a democratic country, and you can't put 0 in front of Turkey to resolve Turkey's problems or human rights related problems. So it is possible that we may not be able to access these technologies, VPN technologies, in the future. And don't forget that majority of the people, internet users in Turkey, are not necessarily capable of using alternative bypass technologies. I mean, even using the Tor browser has become problematic, because the website of the Tor project is blocked from Turkey, and you need to be a quite technical user to play with the settings of the Tor browser to be able to use it. And some people have that capability, others don't.
I recently spoke to a journalist who lives in Istanbul, and he said that he and his friends, even when they're chatting in a WhatsApp group, feel a bit anxious about expressing themselves openly. Someone will make a potentially risky comment, something critical of the government, let's say, then we'll quickly delete it. Also, as I think you saw also on Twitter, Selin Girit, the BBC correspondent in Turkey, recently said on Twitter that she had been locked out of her WhatsApp without sending any message, just receiving a text. My question for you is, to what extent do you think the Turkish government is able to monitor private conversations on WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, and the like? And might it be able to hack or freeze accounts?
Well, this has been the main topic, and people on the WhatsApp platform has been a little bit anxious in the last week or so. There is nothing in this draft which suggests that Turkey will interfere or try to monitor content on the WhatsApp platform. That's not the intention. And there might be some restrictions on all platforms, because there's also an amendment to the electronic communications law, and Turkey intends to interfere with net neutrality as well. So in the future, the Turkish authorities may say, well, there's no public interest in using the WhatsApp platform, or there's no public interest in using Signal or Telegram. That's a possibility, but they're not after the content, but they're quite happy. I think that people are scared. I mean, that's the climate of fear that this draft law created, because everyone is scared in Turkey to express themselves. And it looks like people feel safe on these WhatsApp platforms, which are crowded by people who know each other, because obviously you need to provide your phone number to be in a WhatsApp group. So that's quite personal data. And although there are, like lawyers groups in which not everyone knows each other, usually they are like high school or university friends kind of groups. So people talk more openly, and also they share their discontent and criticism with regards to the government policies and what's going on in Turkey. So obviously they're scared, but the main idea behind this draft law is not to monitor content of these platforms.
Well, yeah, I wasn't really necessarily referring to this draft law. I just mean more broadly. Perhaps the government would do it extra legally. Perhaps they would do it, under the umbrella of fighting terrorism or responding to the failed coup attempt. I'm just wondering more, is it possible that the government might be able to monitor these conversations? Do you think it's something they may be doing or maybe considering or looking into?
Well, it's something to probably ask to Facebook, which owns the WhatsApp platform. And I don't think that without their assistance, they would be able to access any content on the WhatsApp platform. But of course, it depends on what sort of information is stored by Facebook. For example, if the archives are provided by are kept by the users on the WhatsApp platforms, and if they are compelled to provide certain data, then it really depends. But this is something that only probably Facebook can respond. But without Facebook's assistance, it is not possible for the Turkish authorities to interfere with the end-to-end encryption that the WhatsApp platform relies on. But I think a lot of people don't realize that often. How do the authorities, the police or the prosecutors access their WhatsApp data? Usually when there is a criminal investigation, they come to your house, they confiscate your phone, and then suddenly they have access to your WhatsApp communications going back to 10 years or so, if you never clean up your WhatsApp or mailbox for that matter. Then, of course, anyone on those, they access anyone's data or content which is provided on the phone, on the physical device itself. So that is why I suggested to the BBC journalists that people should switch on the two-way authentication, password protected management on WhatsApp. Then at least there is one level of protection, another layer of protection, I would say, to protect data. And also this would prevent any potential hacking or phishing attempts at targeting the users.
I see. Thank you for that recommendation. During the corona crisis, as you mentioned earlier, thousands of people, including journalists and activists, have been investigated, and hundreds have been detained for social media posts critical of the government or its response to the pandemic, which are officially viewed as a threat to incite fear and panic. How do you think this has impacted society and free speech? Have people stopped speaking critically online? I know that Turkish internet users have proved over the years to be inventive and resilient. Are they finding ways around these latest attempts to silence their voices during this crisis?
Well, I mean, the immediate response was to close down several WhatsApp groups and reinitiate them. I mean, it's like a, spring cleaning kind of thing. And which is, I don't know, in between some people got scared and left completely these groups or not. But I think they're still vibrant and alive. So on the Twitter, I mean, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there's more criticism, because people are not happy with the way the government handles its health strategy, or like last Friday when we witnessed the fact that they announced 2 hours before a complete ban in terms of going outside. It created panic and more people went outside. So, and these kind of policies are constantly criticized on the Twitter platform. Some people do it openly, like myself, and others choose to hide themselves behind anonymous accounts or parody accounts, as I would say. And so it's still vibrant. I don't see any impact, but people were obviously concerned. And every time Turkey introduces a new draft on the internet itself, this raises a lot of interest nationally and, of course, internationally. And suddenly, all the media is immediately interested. But let's not forget the fact that hundreds and thousands of people are constantly subject to criminal investigation and prosecution in Turkey because of their social media publications. And this could go back to almost 7 years. We have witnessed in the case of, for example, Canan Kaftancıoğlu from CHP. She was prosecuted for some tweets that she shared and wrote during the Gezi protests, for example, going back 7 years. And we constantly come across and try to help people with regards to cases involving social media postings from the night of the failed coup attempt of 15 July 2016, for example. So something that I say today during the COVID-19 period could be investigated in 2025. So there is that danger and possibility at the moment. So
that's interesting. You mentioned something really interesting. So despite the fact that the government has launched these thousands of investigations into social media posts people have made, but just normal citizens have made, and also some journalists, many people, thousands of people, maybe even tens of thousands of people are still regularly criticizing the government and its pandemic response online. Including you. I wonder, why do you think, or how do you think the government chooses which posts to investigate, to attack and go after, and which it decides to leave and do nothing about?
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, difficult to respond, but I'm just looking at some statistics. For example, during the Erdogan's presidential regime, between 2014 and I have the latest statistics of 2018, 92,806 criminal investigations have been initiated for defaming the president of Turkey. And out of those, approximately 20,000 criminal prosecutions have been initiated so far. And we do not even have the 2019 data yet. And majority of these investigations and prosecutions are related to social media platforms. So anything trivial, from liking something on Facebook to publishing a comment that only one person liked or two persons retweeted can be subject of these criminal investigations and prosecutions. So it's right,
but you don't really have much idea of what kind of posts do not attract government attention, because I saw that recently your tweets, you say this is censorship, this is a horrible tool against dissidents. You say things that one would imagine would upset the government, but there's been no response. So I just wonder, why do you think the government doesn't respond to some of these supposedly, presumably critical tweets?
Well, that's not how the government communicate with its citizens. So there's not much dialogue, and they want us to stay home and keep quiet and watch Netflix, I would say, but they might interfere with Netflix as well in the near future as well. So, we have seen this during the COVID-19 period. A lorry driver, he published his dissent and the criticism of the government's strategy from a TikTok account, and suddenly he was detained, he was investigated, and during the same day there was an announcement made by the Minister for Interior. So, suddenly one single normal citizen raising his concerns is the subject matter of criticism by the Minister of Interior. So that's the kind of country we live in at the moment.
As I said before, these new regulations we've discussed have been dropped from the current economic aid bill, but most observers expect the government to try to pass them again, including you. As Erdogan said in February, quote, social media has become a garbage dump and an idle platform. Back then, I wrote for Aval that the internet and social media in particular had over the years seemed to become Erdogan's nemesis. Ever since the Gezi protests, which you just mentioned, and even before, his government has sought to censor and muzzle free speech online, blocking Twitter, YouTube, Wikipedia, WhatsApp, and others, as you also mentioned. And again, he has ultimately failed for the most part. Could that change? Could you imagine Erdogan finding a way to block these social media platforms, these outlets, for good?
Well, that depends on what and how the social media platforms will respond once this draft comes back to haunt them. In the near future, I expect that to come later in the year when things settle down a little bit, because this is not going to go away. And so they will need to decide whether they want to be in a country where there are serious restrictions in terms of freedom of expression, and whether they want to be the long arm of the law, because that is what they're going to become if they come to Turkey.
Just a last question for you, switching gears a bit. Turkish parliament passed a prison amnesty bill yesterday, approving the release of some 90,000 prisoners, some of them temporarily, including many convicted of child pornography. There have already been several reports that child abuse in Turkey has increased during the corona lockdown, and now hundreds, maybe thousands of child pornographers and internet predators are being released today. Starting today, they're being released from prison. You've worked on child pornography issues in the past. I wonder, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, the first thing to say is that they release everyone, apart from journalists or those who are facing freedom of thought or freedom of expression related crimes in Turkey. Several journalists, Ahmet Altan to name, and Osman Kavala, of course, and several other journalists who are waiting indictments, such as Barış Pehlivan and Barış Terkoğlu, are also in detention, and they're not releasing them. But they are releasing child molesters and other petty criminals. And so, yes, this is a serious problem. I mean, this wasn't what we expected when they started to discuss the release of prisoners from Turkey. Obviously, when you look into the punishment for pedophilia-related crimes, and over the years, especially in the United States and in the United Kingdom, they had and still have serious penalties for especially creating such images. So the abusers are the main target of such crimes, but for distribution and even for possession, there are serious punishments. Up to 5 years imprisonment is envisaged for those who possess child pornography, and it can go up to 10 years if anyone distributes such images and if anyone creates those images with abusing children. So Turkey, I mean, like in any area, doesn't have a straightforward child protection policy. The only thing we do is we either block access to websites, but that doesn't necessarily protect children from harms. So, like in any area of life, that's another dubious policy, and it's quite shameful that those who publish their views or thoughts are staying in prison while the whole world is facing an unprecedented pandemic.
Yaman Akdeniz from Istanbul Bilgi University, thank you so much for your time and insight. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, many thanks, David.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.